All right. I am Ben Burgis. This is Give Them an Argument. I am joined for this week's Thursday night debate breakdown by the People's Econ Prof, current affairs House Economist, and economics professor, Rob Larson. How you doing, Rob?
Good, Ben. Good to see you guys.
And also by Matthew Vernon Whalan, who is a journalist, an oral historian, has a Substack that you should check out. How's it going, Matthew?
Oh, living the dream, keeping it real.
Yeah, I understand the dream lately has mostly been about having COVID.
Yeah, I did have COVID last week. You had COVID the last time we were on before that.
Yeah, that's right. Yep.
So when you and your bro get COVID, brovid.
There you go, brovid. No, it's not fun. I don't recommend it, honestly. Like on balance, I think it's better not to get COVID.
Absolutely. Yeah, I didn't mean to suggest otherwise, by the way.
Yeah. I didn't think you were.
Do other things with your bros.
Yeah. But yeah, that's my hot take for this evening. It's the most controversial opinion I'm going to be expressing tonight. Don't get COVID. It's not fun. What's that?
I already learned a lot tonight. Wow.
I know, right? Yeah, we're going to cover, Middle East politics and health. Yeah.
What diseases you should get.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ask your doctor before getting COVID.
Yeah. Ask your doctor if COVID is right for you.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, I will say when I had it this year, it was not nearly as bad as when I had it last year, which is probably why this year's strain doesn't have some excitingly awful name.
Oh, this is the worst one for me. Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Yeah. No, when I had it last year, it was a nightmare. Like it was, every day was a little bit better, but like the first day that I had it for real, that first day and a half maybe, was like as sick as I could ever remember being. And I was just like wiped the fuck out. I actually remember one time that first day, like one time during the day, I took out my Kindle and I was going to try to read. I was like, nope, this is beyond my capacity right now. Whereas like this time I had it this year, it was just like I had a bad cold and it was really annoying. And it was also very annoying, as a good little sheeple, I, spent 5 days indoors and 5 days not interacting with people except briefly in a mask afterwards. So, none of that. And so like all of that stuff was driving me nuts by the end.
That first day I knew I was sick. It was like I was waking up for the first time in the morning, It was just brutal. I could barely move, Awful.
I've never had a positive test result because I believe in Jesus, so I've been fine.
Oh, yeah, there you go. Ask your doctor if Jesus is right for you.
Yeah, right. There you go.
He'll say no because it's, because your doctor is woke.
There you go. There you go. Yeah. So yeah, this is going to be a fun one tonight. Now, I know, I think Matthew's already seen it. I don't know if you had a chance to look at it all, Rob. Okay, so yeah. So Rob and I are both going to be, looking at this with fresh eyes, but I have seen other debates by Norm on this same subject. So, and I've heard a lot about this one that we're going to watch tonight. So oftentimes for this like Thursday series, like half the time we're watching something from like 1978. But this week we're actually watching something that's like brand new for the last couple of weeks.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I don't know, Matthew, you want to start us out? So I think people who are watching this basically know, probably, know in at least a general sense, but tell us a little bit about our debaters here.
Yeah, well, I mean, I should say I've also been frustrated by how many people in my life seem to have learned about. I mean, I felt this way with Ukraine a bit too. Seem to have learned about this conflict for the first time on October 7th, or taking an interest in it for the first time.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Don't
I
let that stop you from
yeah,
from having strong opinions about the
yeah,
importance
yeah,
of fighting
yeah.
until you recover every inch of the Donbass.
Yeah, and
That you had never actually heard of the Donbass in late 2021.
right.
Yeah,
I would also say that I'm working on a very short piece about this about this debate for my Substack, and
nice.
I sort of prepared some opening thoughts. They're short, but yeah. So I mean, I don't consider myself a military expert or a military historian, but as I understand it, when there's a war, uh, both sides have an army. Uh, and
Yeah. Okay. This right now we're on the same level as don't get COVID.
yeah, right, yeah, uh, and so I think so obviously Palestine has no land army, no air force, no navy, none of that.
Yeah.
And to put that in context,
I mean to and really to reinforce that point. I mean there is no such like that word Palestine is aspirational, right? That isn't actually the name of a nation state that exists right now, right?
yeah,
There are Palestinian groups, right? Hamas,
yeah,
Fatah, Islamic
right,
Jihad, PFLP, whatever, right? But there's no Palestinian state which would have any of these things, or have
yeah,
or even have meaningful control over a territory, which would mean that you had you controlled the land and sea borders, you controlled the airspace, you got to decide what came in and out, all that
yeah.
stuff.
And also, uh, well, yeah, and just to put that in context, I mean that is all great. Further context for the point, but Hamas, since they have since Gaza or Palestine, whatever, has no army,
Mm,
Hamas is estimated to have 30 to 40,000 quote unquote fighters,
yeah,
and uh, a budget estimated to be between 100 and 350 million dollars for sorry, excuse me, 100 between 100 and 350 million dollars for quote unquote military infrastructure.
yeah,
And I mean, not to get into the semantics too much, but just imagine if you saw a bumper sticker that said like support the fighters, uh,
yeah,
but yeah, so 30 to 40,000 fighters, 100 to 350 million dollars in military infrastructure. The NYPD has 36,000 officers and a military budget, sorry, a budget of
yeah. It's
about
kind of like a military budget. Yeah,
about $6 billion for this year.
yeah,
20 times larger than the budget of quote unquote military infrastructure for Hamas. And I'll just, as a side note, the
mm,
actual budget passed by the city council for the fiscal year 2023 was $11 billion. Uh, Israel is the strongest military power in the Middle East, and the U.S. is, it's backed by the U.S., which is the strongest military and economic power in world history. Um, and uh, so uh, I just want to like pause on that, and um, I also want to like I think so. Some of the key takeaways from this debate, in my mind, I mean, I think that is so. Some of the key takeaways are, first of all, obviously nobody's allowed in, nobody's allowed out, and there is a condition on all of this, which is that Hamas be destroyed or no longer in power. But
Yeah, and that's worth, like, I'm sure it'll come up in the debate, but I mean, like, that's worth, taking a second on too, because that phrase keeps being thrown around, right? That like, the goal is to destroy Hamas, or the IDF isn't gonna stop until Hamas is destroyed or eradicated. But it's not really very clear, at least to me, what that would actually mean, right? Like, I
Yeah.
understand what it means to say that, Hamas, in the very ambiguous way that they ever did, right, wouldn't control Gaza anymore, right? Sure, I get that, right? That you could have, Israel directly occupying it, in the way that they did before 2005, or that you could have them like
Yeah.
installing like the, Palestinian Authority there or something like that. But like the idea that like, Hamas just straight up wouldn't exist is like, seems very unlikely, right? I mean, by everybody's admission. I mean, in fact, this is a point that's emphasized in Israeli propaganda. The Hamas top leadership isn't even in Gaza, right? They're in Qatar.
Yeah.
And so, and honestly, it seems like, just, I'm no psychologist, but, I tend to think that having a whole ton of people have their, mothers, brothers, sisters, fathers, uncles, aunts, blown up or dismembered
Yeah.
would be pretty good for Hamas recruitment going forward,
Yeah.
and I would just like, I guess like just the point to think about there is like, look, how many counterinsurgency campaigns have there been in how many different countries around the world where the announced goal is to wipe out
Yeah.
some like asymmetrical or guerrilla, force, and how often does that force actually literally cease to exist
Mhm.
as a result of the counterinsurgency campaign? Like,
Yeah. And
most of the time it doesn't happen that way.
yeah, and just to finish the point, I mean, most of this debate focuses on the semantics of whether what's happening right now is a genocide or whether Gaza is a quote unquote concentration camp.
Yeah,
Uh, and and so I just keeping that imbalance in mind, the fact that Hamas is significantly smaller than one of our police departments. Uh, I also, there are several other takeaways. Also, there are Israeli officials saying there's the extreme end and the liberal end, in my opinion, and much of the extreme end is saying things like we make no distinction between the civilians of Gaza and Hamas because they voted for Gaza. Because they voted for Hamas. And then there's and then at the like liberal end, they're saying they're trying to target militants or fighters and not civilians, but they're also claiming they don't know where the militants are. So we'll just bomb the shit out of the whole place. And I just want to pause, like I just want to emphasize how absolutely extreme this phase of the quote unquote conflict or war is, because I mean, I think when you really look at this, like it's borderline psychotic to support what Israel is doing. Uh, you have, and these are some what I think are some key takeaways from the debate. I just mentioned one because I think it kind of gets cut off and lost in crosstalk. But I think really like everybody should be thinking about these facts.
yeah,
One is that in the first 3 weeks of this exchange, the Israeli military killed more children than were killed in any war zone from the years 2020 through 2022 combined.
right.
Combined. Israel has dropped more bombs on Gaza in the first 3 weeks of the conflict than the US dropped during any year uh, during the war in Afghanistan on Afghanistan.
Yeah,
In
and
3 weeks.
obviously it's a teensy tiny
In three
percentage
weeks.
of the
Yeah. And
landmass of Afghanistan. I mean, we're
yeah.
talking the entire, the entire Gaza Strip. I mean, it's literally a strip of land. It's 25 miles long and 6
And
miles wide.
nobody's allowed in or out. And there's a condition on all of this, which is that Hamas no longer be in power. And when you're holding people captive in a situation like that, and you have a condition on their captivity, That's called a hostage situation. So if we want to talk about how many hostages are being held by Hamas, we should talk about how many hostages are being held in Gaza, and
or literally. I mean, there are thousands of Palestinian guest workers from Gaza who were in Israel when the 10/7 attacks happened, who've been detained since then, right? Their families haven't heard from them. They're
yeah,
just being kept
yeah,
in detention right now. So yeah. Look, I mean, I don't. I mean, my so I wrote something for I wrote something for Jacobin I don't know, a few weeks ago, called Solidarity with Palestine Means Recognizing that Palestinians Aren't a Monolith. And part of the point that I was making in there is that both, a lot of sort of Israeli apologetics, and also I think some well-intentioned people on the left have this sort of habit of talking about the Palestinians as if this was like a hive mind, right? Like that there's this like single collective entity called the Palestinians
yeah,
that's doing things collectively in a way that doesn't really make sense when you start thinking about it, right? Because like, when you say, Israel did this or that, or America did this or that, what you mean is the Israeli state did this or that,
right,
or
right,
the United States as a
yeah.
nation state did this or that, but there is no Palestinian nation state. um
Well,
there are just these different factions that disagree with each other wildly about all kinds of things, right? There are people who support Hamas. There are lots of Palestinians, including Palestinians, who sort of generally defend, the strategy of armed struggle against Israel, who've like condemned like the specific crimes that Hamas committed, in 10/7, etc. And it's and you mentioned that argument about the election, which I mean, you attributed to the extreme end of the Israeli political spectrum, which in a sense is true, but it's like also the extreme has like really moved to the center
oh yeah,
pretty remarkably. I mean, the president of Israel, and granted, Israel is a parliamentary system. The president is largely ceremonial, but he said it, and he didn't have to resign or anything after he said it. Isaac Herzog said that well, we can't really separate the civilian population of Gaza from Hamas because they like didn't do an uprising to overthrow Hamas. That
almost
was the
20
argument.
years ago. Yeah,
You know, and in at its, which is obviously like, okay, that kind of speaks for itself, but I mean, this election thing in particular is like, well, look, yeah, there was an election that Hamas won in 2006 when when a slight majority of people who are alive in Gaza today hadn't even been born yet.
yeah,
There have been 0 elections since then, and in that 2006 election, Hamas didn't even get a majority. They got a plurality, right?
yeah,
And that's so this is like, as much as this is also like bin Ladenist logic, right? That like the civilian population of a place is responsible for whatever its government does, because after all, they could they could vote them out or whatever. So it's like, I mean, it's really a morally sociopathic thing to say in any context, right?
yeah,
Like that this is in fact how you would justify killing random teenagers on October, at like a rave on October 7th, say, oh well, see, they're collectively responsible for everything their government does, and their
yeah,
government's committed all these crimes, etc., right? So it's like, if you reject that, right, you have to reject it, in the everybody who lives in Gaza is responsible for everything Hamas does, but also even more so, right? Because at least when you're talking about Israel or the United States, it is actually true, at least in theory, that people could vote out the government or whatever. And in this case, again, there hasn't been an election for 18 years. This is really this is really the thinnest possible
yeah,
pretext for what's going on. So I don't want to talk too much more
yeah,
before we start watching, but we
yeah,
can work some of this in as we go. But like in the but in a general sense, right? So Norm, people have seen us watch some of his debates on here before. He's been a guest on this show, I don't know, 4 or 5 times in the past. I guess he's I guess he's more or less a known quantity. But how about Eli Lake?
Yeah, so I was gonna say like I don't have a lot of takeaways from Eli Lake because his performance was, I think, really unimpressive. I mean, it's not a good sign when the moderator is doing a better job presenting your case than you are. So I think as far as Eli Lake, like, yeah, this guy couldn't hit a cow's ass with a banjo. But I think, and one of the things that's interesting that comes up is really like uh they start debating, Finkelstein lays out some of the numbers I did about the level of bombing, the amount of children deaths in particular, and there starts to be debate over, like if Israel had dropped that many bombs, and the moderator is actually the one making this case, like, do you think that few people would have died? You know, and
Yeah,
talking about like thousands and thousands of children alone.
right.
So I found that line of argument really shocking, and
Yeah,
talking about a
yeah,
3-week period. But yeah,
yeah,
I was not familiar with Eli Lake, and I felt like he chose the worst possible line of argument that you could choose against Finkelstein of all people, which is just like name calling and like getting upset and frustrated and
yeah.
repeating yourself too much after certain points have been countered.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my take on Eli Lake. Yeah.
Yeah, so I was, I mean, I only like he's a name I kind of vaguely know because I mean, look, obviously I love Norm. I do have one big specific disagreement with something he said about this, which I expect will come up naturally in the course of it. So we'll get to it. We get to it, but I've always admired the guy, and I mean, especially for his advocacy on this issue, and I'm sure he'll be, back in the show, and we'll talk about it all then, but Eli Lake, as I said, is kind of a name that I sort of vaguely know, kind of comes up with, generally in the context of dumb takes on stuff like this. Honestly, I was just looking at his Wikipedia, and I see that we do actually share an employer. He
Yeah.
says,
Beast.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, Eli Lake is an American journalist and the former senior national security correspondent for the Daily Beast. So yeah, we have would have been a little bit funnier if we were still getting paychecks from the same organization right now. But I don't know if he's still writing for them at all. But in any case, they also mention okay, former for Daily Beast Newsweek. Currently, he's a columnist for the Bloomberg View. I'm so there's Bloomberg. I'm always very unclear about the different parts of the Bloomberg media organization. How
That's
they,
that's by design, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I think View is just their kind of all-purpose pundit facility as opposed to like their business
okay,
mainline stuff.
that's their that's their pundit farm.
To the best of my knowledge, and it sounds like the kind of if you cover something for the Daily Beast, in time, Ben, that could be you could have that relationship.
Ooh, yeah, they'll move me up to the big leagues. I'll get to go out to the pundit farm. Yeah, well, if yeah, no, I will practice in front of a mirror, see if I can say the phrase collateral damage with a straight face and without throwing up, and maybe I too will one day get this honor.
Well,
But
maybe, but you'll lose respect, I think.
he's also contributed to CNN, Fox, C-SPAN, Charlie Rose. Oh, that's a name I haven't heard in a while. The I Am Rappaport Stereo podcast, and blogging heads. Okay, well, that sounds like a winner. Let's start the debate. This is going to be, yeah, I've been looking forward to this.
Oh, there we go. We're on the air. Okay, so this is our first live stream here at the Comedy Cellar. Let me welcome you all to our first live stream. I told ChatGPT I didn't want to call it a debate, and ChatGPT recommended disputatious conversation, which I kind of like. So this is our disputatious conversation on Israel. Before we get started, I'd like to mention that the Comedy Cellar is sponsoring what, as far as I can tell, will be the first serious conversation of this kind with no fingers on the scale. You'd think this would be going on nightly all around the country. And I know Mr. Finkelstein has actually, I've seen him urged people to call in with tougher questions, almost like he was itching to get an audience that wasn't built in for his side, and it's hard to get. Obviously, people who watch the show know that this issue is tough for me because it's close to my heart. But I'm going to try to conduct this down the middle and correctly. If I jump in some way, I don't think Mr. Finkelstein will mind because I think you could take on 10 comers and be fine with it from the way I've heard you in the past. So we're not going to have a formal debate with resolutions and all that stuff. I'll ask some questions and we can have an informal discussion. You guys can also bring up whatever questions you want. As far as interruptions go, I'd ask for people to use discretion, try to control yourself if you can. But I do understand that interrupting is sometimes part of a constructive conversation. So, and it's, we want some action also. So hopefully we can keep it to a wise level. I was thinking, as far as potential factual inaccuracies and mistakes, I don't want to pretend that we don't live in the modern age. So after this is all over, if somebody wants to provide me not with a citation, but with an actual excerpt of something that they feel contradicts what someone else said, I would like to include these kinds of addendums in the final package of all this, because it's got to be very frustrating to know that somebody said it's not true and then it lives on forever in some way. So I want to give every opportunity when this is finished and tied in a bundle to create a record that everybody feels is accurate, or at least accurate in terms of referring to the sources. Do I have anything else I want to say here? Okay, so here we go. Eli Lake is an American journalist. He's a columnist for the Free Press, contributing editor to Commentary Magazine, and host of the Re-Education podcast, which I listen to quite often and I think is fantastic.
Thank you.
Norman Finkelstein received his PhD from the Princeton University Politics Department in 1987. He's the author of many books that have been translated into 60 foreign editions. In 2020, he was named the 5th most influential political scientist in the world for the years 2000 to 2020. His two most recent books are Gaza: An Inquest into Its Martyrdom and I'll Burn That Bridge When I Get to It, which is a book where you take on the woke. And I've heard you in a bunch of interviews on that subject, and it was fantastic on that subject. So I would recommend people checking that out, even if they don't agree with them about Israel. Okay, let's start. In a recent post, this is obviously going to start with the Gaza attack, and then at some point, I'm sure we'll rewind all the way back to the 19th century. So, in a recent post, you compared the Hamas attack on Israeli civilians to the Nat Turner slave rebellion. You wrote that Turner exhorted his fellow insurrectionists to kill all white people. You said whole families, fathers, mothers, and daughters, sucking babies, and school children were butchered, thrown into heaps. And you say that Turner's rage was ascribed by white to his religious delirium, so as to obscure the slave uprising's real taproot, not fanatical delusion, but the system of bondage that stoked the flames for vengeance. And then you continue to draw an analogy between Nat Turner psychological analogy, I would say, to what happened with the Hamas uprising. And I'll read from it, or I can let you read from it if you want, because, okay. The 2,000 young men who burst the gates of Gaza on October 7th, 2023, had been born into a concentration camp. For fully 2 decades, they had been immersed in a 25-mile long by 5-mile wide sliver of land that was among the most densely populated places in the world. The vast majority of them could never hope to leave, but only to pace each day the camp's suffocating perimeter, never aspire to gainful employment or eat a full meal, never expect to marry or raise a family. Abandoned by everyone, they were remaindered to languish and die. To expedite this process, Israel periodically launched operations visiting death and destruction on Gaza, thousands methodically mowed down, homes and critical infrastructure systematically pulverized. It might sound like the script of a bad B movie, but on the night of October 6th, each of those 2,000 men probably kissed his mother, then his father goodbye forever. And then each silently vowed to vindicate the remorseless torture of a twilight existence and to avenge the murder of a grandparent, sister, brother, niece, nephew by that satanic power that cursed their lives. So you're offering what I think is a psychological defense there, somewhere along the lines of pleading down from premeditated murder through manslaughter, maybe even to some kind of justifiable homicide. So tell us about that and why you wrote that.
On October 7th, when I first heard about the events, they were described as Hamas members, militants, whatever you want, breaking through the gates of Gaza. And they estimated on the first day about 50 people were killed. It wasn't clear how they were killed, whether they were targeted, whether it was crossfire. So my initial reaction was people broke free of a concentration camp, an open air prison, whichever term you prefer. And of course, I was very sympathetic. In fact, instinctively, I turned to that Civil War song, John Brown's Body Lies a Moldering in the Grave. And one of the lines in the lyrics is, the gods above in heaven are looking kindly down. But by day 2 or day 3, it became clear that something different had happened, or at least something of a very different order of magnitude. And at that point, I had to, in my own mind, try to make a moral judgment as to what, we don't know the details, but we know enough to know that something of an atrocity of a significant magnitude had occurred. And at that point, I was at a loss for analogies. My first thought was my parents. They were in concentration camps during World War II. My father was in Auschwitz and my mother was in Majdanek. So I tried to picture in my mind what would their verdict be on what happened. That was very speculative, though I'm pretty certain what their verdict would be, but we'll leave that aside because it is speculative. The next thing I did was, recently I've been reading a lot of American history, in particular African American history, and everybody knows Nat Turner's rebellion. It was the largest slave rebellion in American history. And it was, I knew it to be very gruesome. Actually, until I read Stephen Oates' biography of Nat Turner, I didn't realize how gruesome it was. He gave the order to kill all whites, and they proceeded to behead a lot of babies. It was very ugly. Okay, now the analogies seem close, though I don't think the evidence is in the Hamas militants beheaded Israeli babies. That's still a very gray area. But clearly there was a level of ugliness that the analogy seemed to hold. And then my next question is, okay, so what was the verdict, the historic verdict on what happened with Nat Turner? And my first impulse was, okay, let me go see what the abolitionists had to say. The abolitionists referred to those heroic whites who gave over their lives to trying to end slavery. People like Charles Sumner, William Lloyd Garrison, Thaddeus Stevens, and so forth. And what struck me when I went over to look at what they said When you look at, for example, William Lloyd Garrison, who is the editor of that famous newspaper called The Liberator, uh, I was quite surprised. I have to say it was a kind of a relief for me that whereas Garrison does state that atrocities had occurred, that horrors had unfolded, if you read closely every word of what he wrote, never once, it's very conspicuous, he never once condemned the slave revolt. He condemned all the hypocrites who suddenly became very pious about atrocities. He said that we warned you, we told you so. You leave these people in this condition, there's going to be a catastrophe. And so when I read that, I felt that was the correct verdict. And then I went on to look at C.L.R. James, what he have to say about the Haitian Revolution, in which whites were systematically targeted in very large numbers, very large numbers. And he said as well, what happened is clearly an atrocity, but he refused to condemn the slave uprising. And for me, that was the right way to try to come to grips with what happened. Um, Anybody, I have one advantage or disadvantage over virtually every other person listening to this program, and maybe every other person, not just virtually. That is, I spent the last 20 years reading through those human rights reports on Gaza, reading through the reports after each of Israel's massacres in Gaza, what it likes to call operations, reading through each of Israel's destruction, murderous destruction of the people trapped in Gaza, what they call, what Israelis like to call mowing the lawn, each time it launches one of its murderous assaults. And people thought that was very funny, mowing the lawn. Isn't that cute? Isn't that clever? And then it occurred to me the other day, you know what Hamas did on October 7th? It mowed the lawn. Is that funny? Is that funny? Is that an object of humor? Why does it suddenly become disgusting where if it describes what Hamas did? But since 2007, I'm not going to even go through all the other massacres, even though I have a pretty good memory. I cannot try as I may. I can't remember the names of all the massacres.
I don't want to interrupt you, but I want to,
Yes.
So, and before I turn to Eli, when you say you were relieved to find that Garrison said that, you relieved why?
I was relieved because knowing as I do, after having studied the situation for 2 decades, knowing as I do the situation in Gaza, I couldn't find it in me to condemn the actions of those concentration camp victims. I couldn't do it.
Okay. So this issue of psychological frame of mind, I want to come back to this throughout this conversation because at every period, the actors we're going to talk about have their own psychology and some of them may be comparable to what you're describing. But go ahead, your response.
Well, for those who are watching, what you just heard from Mr. Finkelstein is utterly demented and historically illiterate. The Gazans are not slaves. Gaza is not a concentration camp. And I have read your books, not all of them, but I have read enough. And you rely selectively only on the most anti-Israel sources, and you never account for the agency of the criminal gang that currently runs Gaza. And so this allows you to
All right, so I was gonna watch kind of a substantive chunk of Eli's response here, and then kind of after they'd I figured that once they'd both said their piece about the sort of opening issue, then we'd pause to comment on it. but I'm just kind of, from the way we've gotten rolling here, I think I have a pretty good sense of how the next several minutes are going to go. And so I don't think that's going to work out, because I mean, you've seen the whole thing. Tell me if I'm wrong. So, but my guess here is that, he says a bunch of stuff denying the factual premises of what Norm just said. And then Norm, defends the factual premises. Norm points out, not only, I'm going to resist the temptation to do a Norm impression here. Not only did I not, not only do I not selectively rely on the most anti-Israel sources, I've quoted this, that, and the other thing, that, like, I've looked at the, the IDF's own estimate of this and that, right? That's kind of how I would see the next few minutes going.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So
I mean, yeah.
So given that, right? I'm sure we're gonna have some fun with that. But I do want to, I do want to, comment on the first chunk of this, right? Because it's like because there are two, there are two issues here. One is how bad is what Gaza is put through, and then two is kind of what follows from that about 10-7. And there is like a really substantive argument to be had about two, but you can only have it once you've acknowledged one, right? Like, in other words, that this is like Eli Lake just kind of isn't in the conversation about two, because he's in denial about one. So I would just kind of say, just to kind of put my own 2 cents on the table here, I do have a disagreement with Norm here about two, not about one. He's absolutely right about one, but I do have a disagreement with Norm about two that mirrors, if you watch from the first time it came on the show, he and I ended up having like an hour-long kind of impromptu debate on air about Russia and Ukraine, and it kind of mirrors the structure of that, right? That in that case, I've certainly spent the last year and a half strongly advocating for a ceasefire and peace negotiations in Ukraine, and I've spent a year and a half being called a Putin apologist, my trouble. So like there is definitely some agreement there, but like at the same time, and I even agree with the premise that it's like not wrong to say that like U.S. policy made the situation worse in the years leading up to it, and that's part of the explanation of what happened. But there is still a disagreement that I have with him about, okay, what should we then say about the Russian invasion? And I still think, well, no, that's not justified. We wouldn't have if you kind of imagine the closest possible analogy to I don't know, like kind of make it Mexico trying to join the Warsaw Pact or something, the three of us and Norm would all be marching in anti-war protests. I support the anti-war movement in Russia, so I won't take you through the sort of details of that debate. People can just look that up. Right? Was that?
I've seen it as well. Yeah.
So people can just look that up if they're curious about it, right? So I think there's a parallel disagreement here. Next time he's on the show, happy to talk to him about that. But is that given one, right? Given that it is just that bad in Gaza, which it is. What follows about Hamas and 10-7, and I'll say like what I kind of said in that Jacobin article that I mentioned earlier. Solidarity with Palestine means recognizing the Palestinians are a monolith. What I said in the monologue I did about this on the show on 10-9 is that you can have you can acknowledge that this is not something that came out of nowhere, that this is a part that the atrocities on 10-7 were part of a cycle of atrocities and counter atrocities that started long before that the cycle of violence is rooted in the sort of very violent system of apartheid that Palestinians in the West Bank, Gaza, to a lesser but still very real degree within Israel itself, are subjected to. You can acknowledge all of that, right? Which you should, because that's all true. right? And still say, no, look, I'm not just going to say, well, the Palestinians did this, so like I support the Palestinians, so I'm not going to condemn it. No, Hamas did that, right? This specific Palestinian organization that's not a organic expression of the rage of, grassroots members. It's a hierarchical top-down organization. It's motivated by a particular, ideology. It has a particular way of seeing the world. I'm just going to quote very briefly from what I said in that, that opening monologue. When you say the Israelis do this or that, presumably you mean that the Israeli state does it. But there's no Palestinian state for you to talk about when you say the Palestinians are doing this or that. There are two Palestinian factions, Hamas and Fatah, that each exercise some level of control over different bits of territory, lots of Palestinian factions that don't control much of anything. And of course, all the millions of individual Palestinians, and like every other ethnicity in the world, they don't all have the same political opinions. There are Palestinians who are Marxists, Palestinians who are Islamic fundamentalists, Palestinians who are pan-Arab nationalists, there's a whole gamut, including tons of Palestinians who condemned Hamas's tactics. The Palestinians who are ideologically closest to what we stand for here, right? The three of us, for instance, are the ones whose long-term vision of justice is a secular and democratic vision with equal rights for everybody who lives there. That means Palestinian Muslims and Christians and Israeli Jews, Thai guest workers, Druze, everyone. And of course, Palestinians who with those politics would never think an Israeli civilians' ethnicity or citizenship made them an appropriate target for collective revenge because they see those people as part of the polity they want to build. Just like the South African communists, for example, recruited both white and black South Africans and understood that white people are part of the future post-apartheid nation they wanted to build because they were serious people. And I kind of go on to point out, right, that like there are people who are killed on 10/7 who are like principled anti-Zionist, Israeli leftists, who in many cases, who have all this exact same politics three of us do, but have had to make much bigger sacrifices for those politics, like going to prison for not serving in the military, and just the it's and I would just say just to wrap up the thought, right, that when you think about this, and I do want to, I don't want to straw man Norm's position, right, because I understand he's not saying he supports this,
or
right?
Eli's for that matter.
Yeah, sure, or Eli's, although that's that would be harder, is my suspicion. But in any case, they have a but I think that so he's not supporting Hamas's atrocities. He's saying that he's not going to condemn it, and we just heard the argument, but but I don't know. I mean, I kind of feel like if somebody like if your mom is an American citizen and somebody killed her in revenge for America's many atrocities around the world, you'd feel comfortable condemning it, right? That they have
I think I would feel more anger towards my own government for provoking it.
Well, you don't have to pick.
I don't know about that. Yeah, I think
I don't think you have to pick. Maybe that's our disagreement here.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah. I mean, I think what you said, I think we would all agree with that. Hamas does not reflect Palestinians. I think that we could all get on board with, and I think in some ways that's an easy thing to point out. And in fairness to Eli Lake, I should say that he tries to point out in his own argument that he's talking about Hamas, not Palestinians. He also tries to apologize for Israeli officials who are talking about both by saying that they're just talking about Hamas, which is not necessarily the case.
Yeah, and I see like coalescence in the chat,
but I think that's the easy argument.
It's the whole comment is not safe for work, so I won't highlight it. But like the sort of substance of the comment is about the Chomskyan point that we should focus on the things that we're best positioned to do something about, relatively speaking, although we shouldn't exaggerate that because it's not like the American public.
Well, not only that.
Hold on. Gets to vote on American foreign policy. If so, by the way, there would already be a ceasefire because like 2/3 of Americans support that. But they have a, but yeah, look, it does make sense to the extremely limited extent that we could influence anything. We could, what we influence is the American government. So that would be a good enough reason for us to focus on it to begin with. And when you add the sort of the fact that the U.S., or in this case, the U.S. and its proxy Israel, are by far the purveyors of the most violence, it makes even more sense to focus on it, right? So to be clear, Coalescence, I totally agree with that, right? I absolutely agree with that, right? Like, I think it's worth kind of taking a second to disagree with people who say, as in this case, you're not going to condemn it or whatever, because it's like, no, I think that's wrong, right? But look, if the question is what should you spend 99.999% of your focus on, totally agree, right? It should be the action of, the actions of the U.S. and its client state in this instance. But I do think that, it's like sort of both morally and strategically a bad idea to, I think it's like kind of wrong in itself, because it's like, yeah, look, if you're like a Palestinian Marxist who wants there to be a single secular democratic state with equal rights for everybody, obviously you're not going to start killing random Israeli civilians because that won't reflect your politics. Whereas if you're like a theocratic, socially conservative, whatever, right, then it will reflect your politics. You're more likely to do it. That's one thing, right? But it's like, also, I think that it's both morally and tactically a bad idea to blur that point, because it's like, look, for the purposes of the primary task, which is condemning the things the U.S. is facilitating Israel in doing, I think that maintaining this kind of clear, bright line, that it's like, if there's one principle you do not want to fucking budge on, it's this absolute prohibition on killing civilians, which is going to be, the heart of our, objection to what the U.S. is facilitating Israel doing. So it's like, I think it's like, I think it's a bad idea. I think it's self-defeating to like chip away at that absolute that sort of absolute line, and and sort of make it seem like we're just kind of turning that principle on and off as the situation dictates.
I suppose I feel I agree. Well, I agree with the broad point, and I also feel at the same time like I don't know. So I think when we're talking about Gazans and Palestinians,
Yeah.
I agree all around with what you just said, and I think that's sort of the easy argument to make. That's for this audience, for the three of us. That's we all agree with that. I think the harder question is like, I don't claim to know what Hamas was supposed to do. Given like when we look at your the number 1 and 2 arguments that you number 1 and 2 points that you made, given number 1, I almost feel like it would be condescending of me to claim that I know what Hamas should do about number 2,
Yeah, I guess I would just point out that we do say that, right? Like in other situations, like we have no problem, nor should we, I think, have a problem saying like to somebody who's an Israeli who like maybe I mean, look, if you think about like I don't know, I have like a 6-month-old nephew. If I watch somebody like kill that nephew in front of me, right, intentionally target him and kill him, then I might very well lose my mind and sign up for a military force to like go kill whoever did that, right?
Yeah.
Like, but I'm still comfortable saying no, but I'm still against that, right? I still have a problem with that. Like, what I might do if I were in that situation is one question, but third person perspective, what I think should be done is a different question. And I'd also point out that it's like, even on 10/7, they were also attacking military targets. And so the question is, well, did they get anything out of doing this, that out of killing teenagers at a concert or whatever, that that, like, did that benefit them in some way, right? Like not just that sort of, like was that of some sort of strategic benefit to them? And it's hard to say how, right? And even to use one of Norm's own historical analogies, right? Like when after the Haitian Revolution, when in the late stages of that, right? So they'd fought off the French, and then they have at the Toussaint was long gone, right? So this guy Jean-Jacques Dessalines was in power, and as after after he'd completely taken over the island, as like part of the mopping up, he ordered these massacres of with some exceptions for different communities that were spared for different reasons, right? But he ordered these massacres of the French and other white populations on the island. It's like, look, did that benefit Haiti in some way? I mean, this is like, in fact, many of his own soldiers were, initially, many of his own officers initially refused to carry out the order because they were horrified by it. He actually had to kind of go on this tour, like getting them to do it, I would, anyway, that would be my argument on number 2 here. I'm sure we can go back to it, or if there's anything else you want to throw in, or actually, Rob, haven't heard much from you lately. So, do you have any thoughts about this before we move on?
Yeah, I was mostly ready to make fun of the debaters, but I didn't know you guys are going to talk about like actual philosophical problems of resistance and revolution. So, guess I'll throw out what I was going to talk about. I think that's a natural thing that, we could disagree with Finkelstein about. Like, I always feel like Norman often draws like especially bold conclusions from his ironclad, impeccable research. So I feel like that's like a legitimate thing that people can legitimately disagree with. I mean, I think that to me, if someone like raised that question, I have a similar response to Matt earlier, which was like, what are they supposed to do? Like, why didn't they do Gandhian nonviolent resistance? When people say that, they're indicating that they have no fucking idea what's been going on for the previous 56 years. I mean, Palestinians doing nonviolent resistance, that was 2018. That was the March of Return. And people in journalism clearly marked journalism jackets, and first responding medical emergency workers just got straight up sniped in giant numbers. You have Israeli snipers bribing about taking knees and stuff. I mean, and that was them doing nonviolent resistance. Your snipers were bragging about taking their knees. And then 5 years later, some of them break out in an insane murder rage. They do this huge, ugly October 7th Hamas massacre. Again, I think on principle and on grounds of how this needs to be argued to make any kind of political steps, we have to draw the line at that targeting civilians thing, as you said, Ben. I think that it is really hard to make that case. And if anyone could, it would be Norman. So we'll let him do it. But like, that is the thing everyone reaches for is like, well, if they have grievances, why didn't they go through channels like the United Nations and nonviolent resistance? And like, it's hard for me not to spit in your eye right now. It's nice liberal interlocutor, just indicating you get your news from NPR. You never heard anything about Palestine that didn't come in a 90-second format. You're not going to know the facts of this.
Yeah, you've never heard of the Great March of Return. You don't know that there were like.
Yeah, I mean, that's if you want to like do anything about this, you have to address what they were supposed to do that.
And when they did that,
like mowed down for unarmed, getting too close to the border.
You shot them for coming up to their side of the border. Like, you shoot them all the time. All of this is happening because of 1,000 odd dead Israeli civilians, which is horrible. But that's how many you guys killed in 2018 with, that was just that era of just that period of bombing Gaza. And that happens like every other year with the mowing the lawn, as Norman said earlier. So I'm eager to get back to the actual debate here and let, I'm sure Eli's going to really put Norm on his toes there. I think he's really going to give him a lot. But I have one other thing to say. I feel like I often make trivial, jokey points in this debate commentary, and that is totally unfair if anyone has ever said that. But I do think it's very funny that this important debate with people dying. This important debate is not happening at SUNY. It's not happening at one of the many private colleges in New York. It's happening in the fucking Comedy Cellar. I hope that Norman and Eli can hurry up with their little debatey whatever, because Rich Voss is coming up tonight. Going to have a great set. Louis C.K.'s got some fresh material. Come on out. I don't know if we want to lose our place here, but if we go back briefly to the moderator who's doing his best, to keep an even keel on an emotional issue, who's over his shoulder as he attempts to balance the difficult, profound geopolitical questions? Fat, stupid Bob Kelly's face. That's who's over his shoulder, which to me, it's funny because I'm used to the Comedy Cellars being a thing that dumb comics say to see them at when they're on funny talk shows. But like that's what we've been forced to resort to actually get a real critic of Israeli policy on. It's like, well, you certainly can't come to the private or public higher ed institutions, but you can go down to Chuckles Comedy Chortle Hut, where you know, hurry up with that so you can see Nick DiPaolo after this debate. It's good.
Yeah, no, in yeah, in I mean, I guess the moderator kind of said this at the beginning in you know, in a much milder and less funny way, that it's like, this is that, like, you would think that this would be happening all the time right now, this conversation, but and yet, yeah, because they just, you know, media mostly just has guys like Eli Lake on who would normally know better than to agree to this conversation. Yeah, so okay, so on the sort of you know, on the question of lost. So on the you know, on the previous subject of debate, you know, I think we've kind of heard extensively from you know, from Norm, and then from me, and then from Maddie, you know, that, you know, we've gotten, you know, we've gotten a good survey of the positions. I'm pretty happy to leave that there, and the main arguments for them. But you know, I would just say two things before we go back to the debate and give Matthew a chance to pee in any case, which are one, you know, I would just point out that the question of specifically targeting civilians is a different question for the question of armed struggle versus pacifism, right? Those are two different issues, right? So secondly, you know, it is amazing the way that, you know, some people online will you know, hear a position that, you know, and just kind of make something up to attribute it to, but it's you know, saw somebody in the you know, in the chat being like, oh, Ben's like justifying Israeli colonialism. It's like, you know, motherfucker, you know,
You're always doing that, Ben. You're always, whenever I see you, you're always doing that. Lay off.
This is the single subject I've been having political arguments about for the longest in my life, right? Is this one. I had an article 2 years ago out in Jacobin on the case for a one state solution. I have today in Jacobin, I have a article out, you know, in defense of Rashida Tlaib, called "From the River to the Sea is a Call for Democracy and Equality."
It just says free. It doesn't say only Palestinians. It just says free, you fucking idiots. You're censuring the best congressperson for the stupidest fucking reason. Like, oh my God. Sorry, you were saying. I interrupted.
Yeah, no, that's good stuff. That's good stuff. Don't be sorry about that. Yeah. God. Yeah, no, exactly. So yeah, I have yeah, no, I think you know, I think I made my position on this pretty fucking clear. And I have no doubt whatsoever that there are you know, that there are many very clear, you know, very calm and sane and rational emails that are already being composed that I'll wake up to in my inbox tomorrow morning from people who have sane and rational responses to this article, which usually happens when I write about this stuff. But in any case, let's go back to the debate.
Make these, you know, performative moral judgments, comparing it to Nat Turner's slave rebellion or what have you. But you are only able to do this because although you have assembled voluminous amounts of information, you have been totally unwilling to ever ascribe any agency to the people that have started this latest war and have started so many of these other wars. So in that respect, I have to say that I'm at a loss as to why you just insist on describing the world's only Jewish state in such demonic terms. And it has consequences, because I believe that the people who have joined these demonstrations, shouting from the river to the sea, in some cases celebrating this massive brutality, they are in many ways your children and grandchildren, intellectually speaking, because you have provided a kind of narrative and framework to not only delegitimize, but to really demonize the only Jewish state. It is a standard to which no other country is held, and you have decided to do it. Does Israel kill innocent civilians? Yes, every army does. But your telling of this story, that every single time the Palestinians are victims and have no role whatsoever in provoking these kinds of conflicts or even being an actor in any of these kinds of conflicts, and your massing of evidence that only seems to go against Israel and never seems to sort of acknowledge things that almost everybody else who has looked at this has knowledge, such as the use of human shields by Hamas. I think it really, it's self-discrediting. That's what I would say.
Okay. Let me ask you a
Yeah,
question.
sure.
So he's bringing up psychology, and in the
Yeah.
law, we recognize psychology. You told me earlier today about a story about when the concentration camps were liberated, how
Yes.
they came and they murdered the soldiers.
Justifiably.
What's that?
Justifiably.
Justified. So where do you feel that his analogy fails? Because not everybody knows these facts the way you do.
Well, I mean, first of all, Israel has provided fuel. Israel has provided electricity. Israel has provided water. And it is this notion that there is this siege of Gaza, which is so inhumane. I've been to Gaza. Granted, I was there 10 years ago. You can find luxury hotels, you can find shopping centers, and you can find incredibly impoverished refugee camps. Now, there are probably a lot of reasons, and I think Israel does have some responsibility for the poor conditions in those camps. However, why is it that in your analysis, you do not blame the group that siphons off development aid, that has done everything it can to, well, let's just say, immiserate Palestinians, in the sense that not only do they rule the Gaza Strip, as you would expect fanatic fascists would, but they also start these wars, which Israel retaliates. So you look at this massacre and you say, aha, they were mowing the lawn. I look at this massacre and I say, you are a false friend of the Palestinians. This was an obvious sort of decision from Hamas with no consultation from the people of Gaza themselves. And by the way, Hamas is underneath Gaza City in tunnels, somewhat secure from the aerial bombardment. They have stockpiled food and fuel, of course, which they are not giving to the average citizens. They knew that there would be a response, especially something this vicious. So, of course, you are explaining away the worst pogrom against Jews since the Holocaust. But you are also, it's a slur against Palestinians if you think this is some sort of authentic representation of what Palestinians want. You think that they want this kind of thing? You think that this would not provoke a response from a far more powerful military?
Is it an authentic representation of the psychology of the people in Hamas who did this?
The people in Hamas, I mean, what are we talking about? This is, I mean, a terrorist is an overused word. I think that we have to look at Hamas right now as an organization of Anders Breiviks. It's a group of mass shooters at this point. So again, if you care about the Palestinians, why have you never devoted a single word to getting rid of this disgusting fascist organization that...
I'm going to try not to stop this often, but I just wanted to say that's an interesting analogy. If you accept his premise there about Anders Breivik and mass shooters, like, okay, sure, if the cops don't have any way of stopping a mass shooter except to shoot them, right? We accept that's fine. They can shoot them, but if a mass shooter, say, hides in the basement of a hospital, we wouldn't think that the NYPD was justified in wiping out the hospital. right? Like this is the like the mass shooter analogy. I think is not going to get him where he wants to go.
And plenty of officials claim they don't know where the militants are hiding.
Right.
And also, let's just also, I mean, just to go back to the beginning, like the fact that he calls them a group of mass shooters, again, I think like illustrates the imbalance of forces in a way that is really grotesque. You know, you have the strongest military power in the Middle East backed by the strongest military power in human history with diplomatic and economic support, waging a war, waging what I would call genocide, or just wage a war against a group that their side is describing as a group of mass shooters. I think it illustrates the imbalance of forces really well.
Yeah, and it's also pretty rich to be saying, well, we don't want a bunch of fanatical fascists, so you got to support Israel and the Likud government. Which,
yeah.
It's the whole thing again. Ben earlier showed his article about Rashida Tlaib, but it's extra insane because, she sang a song with a sentence that could be very arguably construed as supporting ethnic cleansing. The government of Israel, like numerous cabinet and parliamentary officials, are saying, yeah, ethnic cleansing. We should cleanse Gaza ethnically. A racial resolution or an ultimate resolution. That's good. An ultimate resolution.
Ultimate resolution, yeah. No, it is fascinating how I keep hearing the last few weeks about, okay, well, look, this cabinet member said something super genocidal, but they're not like an important cabinet minister. They're just a very minor one, so that doesn't really count. And they're like,
only the education secretary. It's not.
Yeah, they're not in the top 5. The president of Israel said something super genocidal, but whatever. That's mostly ceremonial. Okay, Benjamin Netanyahu had a explicit analogy Hamas to Amalek, who, if you know your Old Testament, Amalek is where there's the commandment to kill every man, woman, child, and suckling babe. But he didn't mean it like that. He wasn't he wasn't referring to he wasn't referring to that. He just meant it was like that in some other way. It's it's just at a certain point, it's guys, what would it take to convince you of this?
Yeah. How explicit do you need a set of steps? Because that really is what was in that leaked intelligence document, was the list of steps for ethnically cleansing Gaza into Egypt. Amazing stuff.
Yeah, and also just literally there are 2.3 million people, right, living in the Gaza Strip, and over half of them were ordered by the Israeli military to leave their homes. I mean, that that by itself seems pretty, if that had been the only thing that had happened, right, that would seem awfully ethnic cleansing. Never mind the hospitals, and I know the first one is in dispute, but not the subsequent ones. Ambulances, schools, churches, mosques, convoys of people fleeing from the areas they were ordered to evacuate from, et cetera, that are ordered that that have been. I saw going to be talking on Monday's show to Anna Kasparian about her conversation with the PBD guys about this, and there's a line in that conversation. It's look, I think people generally know I'm not the biggest fan of as-a sentences, but I liked this one. She's there's a point in the conversation where she was just yeah, as an Armenian, I know a genocide when I see one.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's so ridiculous. Yes, I suppose one of the things you could mean by from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, is that from the river to the sea will create a exclusive Palestinian ethno state where Jews can't live. But another thing you could mean, right, would be from the river to the sea will everybody who lives in that area will get to be a citizen, that will have equal rights, freedom, right? That which would in fact be a much more literal interpretation of the actual words that are being used. And
Yeah.
also Rashida has made it beyond clear many, many, many times which one of those she means, right? But
especially at the same time that Likud ministers are saying from the river to the sea, Palestine will be Israel and no Palestinians because of our detailed ethnic cleansing plan. Let me refer you back to that.
which by the way, Joshua Blanchard pointed this out on Twitter to me. He pointed it out while I was working on the From the River to the Sea article, but I couldn't find a natural place to fit it in. But it is worth, saying. I like that. Jelpermans, thank you for the super chat, says I'm old enough to remember what apartheid supporters shrieked that Free South Africa actually meant to exterminate all white people to leave 2024. Yes, I would love that. Have her run as an actual anti-war candidate, not a fake ass anti-war candidate like Vivek or RFK. But yes, in shit, sorry, I lost my train there for a second.
I hate it when that happens.
Yeah, like it's yeah, no, I think that's like it's so. Oh yeah, sorry. What I was going to say was Joshua Blanchard pointed out on Twitter that people often, I think I've made my feelings about Hamas clear already. But like it is also funny that like people constantly bring up the Hamas charter and all the awful, blood curdling stuff in there. The founding platform of the Likud party, which Rob mentioned earlier, which is currently the ruling party in Israel, its charter, if you will, says that everything between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea should be exclusively Israeli territory, which is it's like, okay, interesting. I guess that's different for some reason.
Yeah.
I mean, also, nobody here thinks that, including Finkelstein, thinks that Hamas is like a good organization.
Yeah.
Right thing, but I just think it's worth pointing out, and going back to the principle about civilians, which I think again we all agree with. I still don't think that you can view that equally or judge that equally in every situation. I mean, I'll throw myself on the fire and be the one to admit that I will not judge everybody equally. Those civilians, I mean, I have, I mean, Ben, I know I proposed some Muhammad Ali debates to you in the past. There are things he says in those. There are things like, in other words, there are things that blacks might say about whites, or Jews might say about Germans, or Palestinians might say about Jews that I would think it was inappropriate for me to say or to do, but I feel like it would be condescending for me to judge them from my perspective in that way.
I guess it depends a little bit what judge means, right? Like, like in other words, it's, it's like, I think like, is expressing disagreement judging, is like saying, like, I don't,
condemning,
yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think you could talk about like, that's somebody in the chat said that we were talking about the open and norm stuff. I think you could talk about diminished responsibility, and that might make sense. There's a, I don't totally know how much hangs on that distinction at the end of the day. But and also, of course, if you're just talking about like what people say, right, or like what opinions they have in their heads, right, that's a very different thing from like who you kill, right? That's
yeah.
But
I wouldn't participate in either.
Yeah. Oh, so okay. So last thing, maybe before we resume the debate, I did want to go back to one of the things that Eli said before, which was, I don't know why I'm calling him Eli, like he's my friend. But yeah, Eel Dog, is the buddy Eli here. He says that he keeps talking about starting, right? That's like that. Oh, you're denying agency to Hamas, which has started all these wars, and this is, and I think it's really worth kind of not letting that go, right? Because it's like, well, hold up, that's not true, right? I mean, there's like that, I mean, if and this is something you hear people say too. It's like, oh, well, there was already a ceasefire and Hamas broke it. It's like, well, come on, are you really telling me that that Israel did nothing this entire time, right? That they didn't, that they didn't kill anybody in Gaza, in the time that you're talking about. And certainly, again, I think even beyond that sort of more technical sense, in which I think you are going to find lots of Israeli ceasefire violations earlier, but like even beyond that sense, I mean, just in a sort of broader sense, like I think it's really disingenuous for Lake to talk about this as if it's like, I don't know, everybody in Israel had just kind of forgotten that the Palestinians were there, and they were just kind of going around about their business, and then like out of nowhere this happened, right? I mean, there's like 10% of the West Bank that has become like totally cleansed of Palestinians this year, because of settler pogroms, with the at the very least complicity and often participation, of Israeli soldiers. I mean, that's just happened this year. I mean, it's gotten much worse, of course, since 10/7, as you'd expect. But I mean, that was already true, before the 10/7 attacks happened.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
also to Rob's point earlier, I mean, Finkelstein does a great job, I think, countering about who started each volley,
Uh,
but to Rob's point earlier about the March of Return, even in that situation, Israel and the U.S. described what Israel was doing as self-defense, and the critics of it, like Bernie Sanders, described it as disproportionate force.
uh,
Even though it's a situation under international law where Israel doesn't have the right to use any force. If you and Finkelstein has made this point, like if you shoot a child in the back who's running away, that's not disproportionate force. That's a situation where you don't have the right to use any force. And in fact, under the same international laws, Palestine or Gaza, whatever, has the right to defend itself from an outside occupier. So, and they don't have the right to kill civilians for sure, but they're also in a situation where they can't really fight in any feasible way. And
yeah,
they don't have many resources and yeah, so
yeah, but they can't fight in any way that would lead to a military victory over Israel for sure.
or that's not near civilians. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think that there's like, I don't want to exaggerate that point, because I think just trying to be like, steely-eyed accurate about this, like, it's not like, oh, I mean, look, you don't want to do the equivalent of the IDF thing, oh, they're like human shields or whatever. It's like, no, there's like a, you could have done a version of 10/7 where you only attacked IDF, targets. It's not clear that would have somehow been worse for them, or anything like that. But yeah, well, okay, so that's good. Actually, that also reminds me of the other thing I was going to say about Eli Lake's comments earlier, is that he invoked this human shields trope, which is worth taking a second about, right? Because I think there are two things to say about that. One is, first of all, just on a factual level, right? Just saying like, well, there's Hamas stuff that's next to civilian stuff, so therefore Hamas is in effect, using the civilians as human shields, because you can't drop a 2,000-ton bomb on them without killing a bunch of civilians. I would just point out that I've, other than a few years in Korea, I've lived in America, 6 months in Mexico, but for the most part, I've lived in America my whole life. And so I have noticed, for example, that American shopping centers have military recruitment offices in them, that that like American military bases have residential homes like built literally like feet away from the gates.
They'll come
So-
to your high school. Yeah.
yeah, military recruiters will come to the high school. Yeah, they all, they'll again, they'll have, military offices and shopping centers. There's like the civilian neighborhoods literally right next door to military bases, etc. If anybody was bombing the US, right, they could use the same human shield argument. And from, what I've heard, what I understand, you could make all these points about Israel also if you're so inclined. So that's one point, right? But then the other point, I guess, is just, again, the Anders Breivik one, which is like, yeah, look, if Anders Breivik had fled from the scene and like, and like hid out at a preschool somewhere, right? Nobody would have thought that the Norwegian cops were therefore authorized to kill everybody in the preschool to get to him, right? That they, that like, even if there is, like the sort of thing that you could like truly call a human shield, like you're in like a hostage situation, right? It's like, oh, here are these people in this building full of civilians. I'm going to kill them all if you get close or whatever. Like, well, we still don't, like, we still want like them to be hostage negotiators and stuff because we value the lives of the people who are actually being used as human shields in those scenarios. We don't think it's like, human shields, not my fault. Sorry, 2,000-ton bomb.
Yeah, it's amazing too, because if it's someone else, everyone will recognize that. I remember like 2007 or something, Russia had those, I think they were Chechen separatists. They had some, or Dagestani terrorists take over like an opera hall in St. Petersburg, I think it was. I'm sure one of the commenters will explain the 50 ways I'm fucking the story up. But they had a hostage situation, and the Russians went in with a huge amount of firepower and killed a shitload of the people being held hostage, and did giant carnage. And everyone in the Western world was like, wow, Russia not valuing life. Like, yes, there's criminals in there. It doesn't justify killing all those nice opera goers and their nice, delicate little glasses, So this is, very similar. Like, Gaza is super crowded because half its population is people who are displaced by the original formation of Israel or their descendants, And so, everything is fucking cramped, and people live right next to hotels and, military barracks just like they do in fucking New York. I live in Tacoma, Washington. We have a giant Air Force base right outside town, big old civil barracks in the center of the city in case we ever have another giant railroad strike. We can repress it with the National Guard based out of there. Worked in 1800s. I'm sure it would still work now. But that's, I don't feel like I should be held responsible for whatever fucked up shit our military does in Syria tomorrow to discourage anyone from helping the Gazans, But that's an amazing thing that idiots can say, like, oh, well, they're using them as human shields, so I have no choice but to kill them, Similar to how Japan used human shields by having their population live on its islands. Like, oh, they're using those large cities as human shields. We have no choice but to kill them all.
And also, it's really like Israel is using Palestinians as human shields against the targets, because like in some ways we don't even have to use this metaphor, because Israeli officials have said over several times that they don't know where the militants are, and so they're just gonna bomb the shit out of the place, hoping to hit something, I guess. But
and it's like if they're that willing, like. Yeah, if you're willing to kill 10,000 civilians so far in all these bombs, like they're using them as human shields. What the fuck, shields? Shields are something that protect you from shit. You just blow them up into little pieces. They're not even shields. So you're saying they have humans, is what you're actually saying. Because they're not shields. You still blow them up. It's not a shield.
And you don't know if they're shielding anyone because you've said that you don't know where the enemies are. So
totally.
I would just quickly recommend, the whole book on Norman Finkelstein's whole book, 2019 book on Gaza, an inquiry into its martyrdom. And also, I would just recommend this chapter to people for people who don't have the time to read the whole book. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, incredible work. Really, really incredible work. I've not seen anything as impressive on Gaza. But it also, just for people, it is very dense. It's extremely dense. Took a long time.
That's our boy.
Yeah, took a long time to read for me. Yeah. I consider myself a fairly skilled reader on these subjects, but it took a long time to get through. But I would also, for those who don't have the time to get through it, there are some chapters that are really, really incredible. And I would recommend for anyone, wondering about this, who doesn't have the time to read the book, just read this chapter that they're debating right now.
Yeah. All right, let's go back to it.
Rules over them in a misery.
All right, Mr. Finkelstein.
Well, the people who rule over Gaza are, I agree with you, a disgusting fascist organization called the State of Israel. Gaza is legally not even any longer occupied territory. Gaza has been illegally annexed by Israel according to international law. But we'll leave that aside and let's turn to the facts. Now, there seems to be an objection to my describing what's happening in Gaza as a concentration camp.
Yes.
And there seems to be an objection because I'm not giving enough agency to the people of Gaza. So let's look at the facts, because as facts as the British adage goes, facts are stubborn things. So let's look at the basic facts. Number one, what is Gaza? Gaza is 25 miles long, less than the length of a marathon, and Gaza is 5 miles wide. That is the distance from where we are now on West 4th Street, NYU, to Columbia University, 116th Street. So if you imagine a marathon by the distance from here to Columbia University, that's Gaza.
That's the width. I heard it described it as big as Manhattan plus the Bronx plus Hoboken.
Maybe.
Okay. Which that seems bigger to me than.
Okay, no.
And I want to get it accurately.
We want to be accurate,
Yeah.
but I don't think there's any dispute. It's 25 miles long by 5 miles wide.
Yes.
Okay. Gaza is among the most densely populated places on God's earth. It's more populated than Tokyo. The population of Gaza is 2.3 million people. Of those 2.3 million people, 70% are refugees or descendants of refugees. That is Palestinians who were expelled from Israel in 1948. Approximately 290,000 ended up in Gaza. And so those refugees, their children, and their grandchildren. Gaza, a fact that should be of interest and concern to your listeners, Gaza is over half children.
Can I pause it?
Yeah.
Just so I understand. So when you say it's densely populated,
Mm-hmm.
what should I be picturing? I know it's less densely populated than Manhattan during the day. It's around like London. Gaza City is much more dense than.
Mm-hmm.
But how does this dense population actually bring itself to bear on day-to-day life? I mean, I've seen videos of it. It seems like a normal kind of city.
Well, I've only been to Gaza a few times, but I don't think it's correct to describe it as a normal city in terms of its density. And I don't want to get into quarrels about that. I said I would start with the facts. And I think it's universally.
Yeah, but we have no way to gauge what density means.
Right.
And I'm trying
saying
to
it's
picture it.
universally described as, quote, among the most densely populated places on Earth and more densely populated than Tokyo. Beyond that, I don't want to
get. Yeah, but Tokyo is a fun city to live in. That's what I'm saying. So why is that so terrible?
Okay, so that's what we're going to get to now.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry.
That's what we're going to get to now.
Yeah.
So as we proceed, let's bear in mind, as I said, that the population is half children. I'm just going to jump ahead for a moment, and then I'm going to get back to Gaza, or the details of Gaza.
Okay.
In the past 3 weeks, Israel has killed about 3,500 children in Gaza. That's more children have been killed in Gaza than all the war zones in the world combined for the years 2020, 2021, and 2022. The last time more children were killed in the total war zones in the world was in 2019. Okay, now let's get back to your question. Tokyo is a fun city. Maybe. I've not been there, but I'll take your word for it. Is Gaza fun? Let's see.
I'm just referring to the density,
Yeah.
to be fair.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to be unfair. I'm just trying to quote you.
Right, but
Okay.
I was trying to picture
Yeah,
the
that's
density, not
fine. That's
obviously
fine.
in other ways the
We're
comparison
not
is
going to quibble
yeah,
over
yeah.
quibble over those things. So, in 2006, there was an election in Gaza. The election was urged on the Palestinians, among others, by President George Bush. Hamas surprisingly decided to participate in the election. Originally, it was against all the elections because it was under the aegis of the Oslo Accord. They didn't want to participate. They decided to participate. Surprise to everybody, they won because the Palestinian Authority, the administrative unit in Gaza, is hyper corrupt. People wanted a change, not something Americans can easily understand. And they voted to elect Hamas into office. Former President Jimmy Carter was among the monitors of the election. He pronounced the election completely honest and fair. The day after the election results came in, Israel imposed a brutal blockade on Gaza. That blockade was then reinforced by the EU and the United States.
Can you get in here now to okay, go ahead.
I take notes. He can take notes. I'm even happy
Okay.
to present them with paper and a pen.
That's fine.
Okay, so now in 2006, the blockade was imposed on Gaza. So now let's get to the question of agency. Okay? Nothing can go into Gaza and nothing can leave Gaza without Israel's permission. No one can go into Gaza and no one can leave Gaza without Israel's permission. Israel controls the water, the surrounding water. Israel controls the airspace. Now, here is fun Gaza. 50% of the population is unemployed. 60% of the children, of the young people, 60% of the young people are unemployed. Half the population in Gaza is classified by international humanitarian organizations as suffering from, quote, extreme food insecurity. That's Gaza. Now, people like to talk about Hamas.
You know, I've looked up that fact, and there's a very high, almost similar, I think, stat that they give about America in terms of food insecurity. So it's not the same thing as starvation; it's some sort of poverty measure. But I don't mean
there are different gradations. I refer to extreme food insecurity, and that applies to about half the population of Gaza.
I interrupted only because it's another one of these adjectives like density, which it evokes something, but we don't really know what that means. And you know, I just try to really picture: are they hungry? Are they not hungry? But you know, that they're not quite sure where the next dollar is coming from. These kind of things. The essence of truth I'm trying to get to.
So we talk about Hamas as this kind of, I guess it was called fascist organization. Hamas, the people who burst through the gates of Gaza, they were overwhelmingly about 20, 21, 22 years old. That means they were born into the concentration camp. They had never seen anything else. And there was no prospect of ever seeing anything else. So what was the surprise that people who were born into a concentration camp, half of whom have never seen a full meal in their lives, what is the surprise that they would be, as Nat Turner was? One of the things that struck me when I read his biography was Nat Turner happened to have been a very smart guy.
Only because we're half an hour and we only have on our first question. So no disrespect.
I'm just no problem.
Yeah.
I'm saying that these young men should be consumed by rage and fury, not just at their own lives having been destroyed, but those periodic operations In Operation Cast Lead, Israel killed 1,400 people, 350 of them children. Operation Protective Edge, Israel killed 2,200 people, 550 of them children. And then you can go through the house demolitions and so forth. And then for me to hear in the midst of that, what about agency? It's as if to say, in the Warsaw Ghetto, what about the agency of the Judenrat? Well, they had some agency. I will agree with that. The Jewish Council, I'm not going to dispute that. But
Professor,
at the end of the day, really, let's be honest. How much agency did the Jewish councils have?
okay, let Eli, come on.
Well, again, thank you for your historical illiteracy. There is no comparison between what the Nazis did to exterminate 6 million Jews and what Israel has done to try in the last, say, 16 years to deal with a fascist, fanatic organization that is on their border that has turned the Gaza Strip into essentially a military weapons factory to attack Israel in any way that it could. And so you speak of these, and listen, it is tragic in war when people are killed and civilians are killed. And this is sadly a fact of war. But where in your story do you account for the fact that Hamas has broken ceasefires, launched rockets, launched missiles to times, and kidnapped soldiers, and now massacred 1,400 civilians in cold blood? These are very different decisions than the Warsaw Ghetto. And to even make the comparison is not only insulting to the memory of the Warsaw partisans, because they never did anything like that. They never sort of went on a murderous rampage, as you described, but it's also insulting again to the Palestinians. I believe that you are a false friend. You are not their ally. You pretend to be the one documenting this great crime in all of your exaggerations and inaccuracies. But what you really are doing is you are saying what can we expect from them? Of course, they're going to act like these savage barbarians, and you justify it. And I say, no, there are other explanations. A lot of this, and maybe we can play the clip now of some of this Hamas television. Here's an effort to try to brainwash Gazans into this disgusting ideology.
You had one here about children. You have that
Yep.
one that says children?
Yeah. You want to play that?
Yeah.
These are children's programs that are produced by Hamas. Here we go. Let's watch this.
Make sure I have sound, yeah. Actually, it's in Arabic, so.
صحيح.
وأيضا الجهاد.
الجهاد في سبيل الله. الجهاد هو ايش يا فكور؟ هو السلام الاسلام.
طيب لازم نعرف حبايبنا الأطفال أيضا إنه اليهود المجرمين قاعدين بخططوا وبيعملوا أنفاق من تحت إيش المسجد الأقصى المبارك عشان إيش يسووا؟ نسيت إيش بدهم يعملوا الهي بدهم يحطوا بدل قبة الصخرة الهي إيش اسمه؟
هيكل المزعوم. ده الحفريات هذه بتاعت المسجد الاقصى هيجي يوم ما راح
ايش هم مخططهم الكيان السوريين ايش بده يسوي؟
بدهم يحطوا يعني زي ما بيسموا او هيكل سليمان المزعوم كما قلتم يعني. طبعا هذا الشغله ناكد غير صحيح او ما له وجود اصلا يعني وما راح ينحط كمان. طول ما احنا موجودين وفلسطين موجوده والاقصى موجودين راح نضل نرابط الى اخر قطره دماء فينا.
No, let it keep going. Is that the end of it? Having a technical problem?
So,
well, can you try it again, Nicole? Press play. That's the end? Okay, so good.
I mean, we could show the one where they talk about Jews as apes and pigs.
Might as well get it out because
sure.
this is
Do they call them human animals, by the way?
Well, I think that Hamas are human animals. Do you disagree? You disagree that the people who would do such a thing are human animals? I think human animals is charitable.
I want to get back to the points that you made. But
play the apes and pigs only because if we're going
the human animals while we're playing apes and pigs, let's play.
You know what? Go ahead, play the apes and pigs. The human animals. I mean, I do have that quote here from
لنرى شذاذ الآفاق
Here we go.
إخوان القردة والخنازير فخسف بهم إلى حيوانات مستقبحة.
You think we should reach out to the moderates in Hamas?
If you allow me, since many points were made, unfortunately rarely documented, but I'm not going to get into that now. Also, I want to just
So the human animals, since you asked for it, you said that Gideon Levy had described them as less than animals. You said that too.
No, that was Gideon Levy.
Yeah,
But the Israeli government on the first day called them human animals.
We're talking about the defense minister, and he was
Yeah,
referring to Hamas. He said,
Right.
we are fighting.
Yeah, and
Well-
as I said a moment ago, let's try to figure out who this Hamas
Let
is.
me put this in because since you
Yeah.
so I watched you on Aaron Mate's show, and I'm friendly with Aaron, and you did Katie talked about the defense minister, and there is that quote which he talks about the people that they're fighting, but then you said, well, Gideon Levy also described them as less than
That's correct.
animals. But then I read what he wrote, and he wrote, animals isn't even an appropriate term for the crimes committed by the Hamas invaders on Saturday. No
correct.
animal convicts. And then he goes
Hamas
on.
invaders.
Then he goes on. Gaza is plagued with Hamas, and Hamas is a despicable
Yes.
organization. But most residents of the Gaza Strip are not like that. So the whole point of his column, as I read it, was to say that yes, Hamas is worse than animals, but let's never
Right.
extend that to the people of
By the way,
Gaza.
this is the
Right,
point that
right.
I've been making
Right.
with you, Norman.
You had
Right.
said something otherwise.
Not wanting to quarrel. I think the whole point of what I just said a few moments ago was, let's look at what Hamas is. Let's look at those 2,000 militants. So I'm willing to acknowledge they are Hamas.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to figure out who are these people? So now let's turn to what Mr. Lake had to say. I documented very great length the whole issue of who broke the various ceasefires since 2006. I'm not going to go through the details now because there'll be
Please, let's do it.
Look, I'm very happy to. If you would like me to go through the details.
No, we don't have time. But you
Right.
you can
Okay.
you can send them to me, and then you can send them to Eli, and then
Right.
I'll include.
Let's go.
Give us the key, like
Let-
an example of
Okay.
a major one.
So let's take Operation Cast Lead. In June 2008, there was a ceasefire signed between Hamas and Israel. It wasn't signed, it was unofficial. Ceasefire. You look at any of the sources, that ceasefire held until November 4th, 2008. November 4th, 2008, Israel went into Gaza and killed 8 militants, knowing full well what the consequence would be. There is no dispute. See, one of the problems, Eli, is I don't think you read very carefully. I'm not going to resort to the juvenile insults that you hurl at me because they're frankly beneath me. But you say that I only use Hamas sources or selective use of source.
You
Yeah,
use human
what I
rights
use-
groups that
what
are
I-
biased.
Right.
Sure.
What I use is every available respected source on the topic. I use Amnesty International. I use Human Rights Watch. What do you use? I've gone through all the sources across the spectrum. And one of the things that's quite remarkable about the Israel-Palestine conflict is there is a broad consensus among all respected human rights organizations about how Israel carries on in Gaza. Let's take one basic.
I don't think Human Rights Watch or Amnesty International are
I
respected
know,
human rights
I know, but you see,
organizations.
you didn't really answer what I said, so I'll repeat myself.
Well, I use
said-
Hamas people
said-
themselves.
I
I'm
said
happy
there
to
is
play
a-
you their quotes.
I said there is a broad consensus among all respected human rights organizations as to how Israel conducted itself, and also as regards the blockade of Gaza, which is characterized by all human rights organizations. In fact, it's all of them describe the blockade as a war crime. Richard Goldstone described the Gaza blockade as likely a crime against humanity. Now, here is the question I'm going to put to you
But
very
but
simply.
didn't he withdraw? He
Yes,
walked that report back.
He walked the report back. That is absolutely correct. He did not, however, not to go into fine points, he did not reject that particular finding. He rejected other findings. He didn't reject that particular finding. Everybody, every human rights organization describes the blockade as a form of collective punishment that rises to a war crime. But let's leave aside.
But he did retract what he considered to be the most serious finding of the 29 people killed in the home, right?
Let's say he was willing to accept that Israel had made a case before Israel itself had made a definitive finding. But I'm going to lose the listeners.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
And I don't want to lose the listeners. So I'm going to just make 3 quick comments.
Okay.
3 quick
Make
comments.
it quick so we can get on.
Yes.
Yeah.
Number 1, I would like Eli to point to a source that I ignored in my research. You say I was selective. Now, everybody should listen carefully. What is my selectivity? According to Eli, it's Human Rights Watch, it's Amnesty International, it's B'Tselem, the Israeli Center for Human Rights in the Occupied Territories. It's all the UN organizations. So now let's hear Eli list the impartial human rights and humanitarian organizations that I selectively omitted, because frankly, I would be curious.
Okay.
I'm very happy to answer.
Mm-hmm.
In your book, Inquest into its Martyrdom on Gaza, you have a chapter devoted to the concept that you believe you are debunking the idea that Hamas uses human shields in its various wars that it starts with Israel, which you do not think they start. Well, can we play the clip of the recent Hamas guy talking about why they don't build bomb shelters and so forth? I mean, I can. I'm basing this on what Hamas itself said. They urge Palestinians to go on the rooftops when Israel is bombing. So that's. Why don't we play that?
There was a case. It is correct. There was a case where Israel targeted a civilian home for demolition, and then I cannot say now with certainty because my memory is not perfectly clear on it, but either they were urged, Palestinians were urged to save their home by going on the rooftop because it was targeted for demolition. That's not human shielding. I don't think Eli.
That's not what I'm talking about. They said, listen, they constantly talk about the importance of martyrdom. They constantly, you're picking on like
Eli, you can't. I assume that you have some academic or scholarly background. You can't just say they all the time do.
Hamas.
That's not serious. You have to present documentation which then the listener can verify.
Okay,
let's play the clip.
There's 3 videos here he has. One says we don't build bomb shelters, play that first. And then, we can't see it, Nicole. And then the other one should human shields 1, human shields 2. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
البعض يتساءل، وهذا سؤال رائج وشائع، يعني من قام بتشييد 500 كيلومتر من الأنفاق، لماذا لم يشيد مآوي يلجأ إليها المدنيون خلال القصف؟
نحن شيدنا الأنفاق لأنه لا نملك ما ندفع به عن أنفسنا من القتل والاستهداف. هذه الأنفاق من أجل أن نحمي أنفسنا من الطائرات، نحمي مقاتلين من الأنفاق. أما القطاع غزة فأنت تعلم والجميع يعلم بأنه 75% منه لاجئين، واللاجئين هو مسؤولية الأمم المتحدة في حمايتهم، مسؤولية الاحتلال في أن يقدم كل تبعا لاتفاقية جنيف الدولية أن يقدم لهم كل الخدمات وهم تحت الاحتلال.
Should we play the human shield ones and get it?
Like
That's what we get. get all.
Maybe before we move on,
Pause, Nicole.
what was objectionable about what he said? I'm not sure. There's something apparently revelatory in that video. Now, memory is notorious, and memory, the alleged translators are notoriously untrustworthy. But I'm going to leave that aside.
Let me just tell you about
I'm
that.
curious,
I did a podcast a couple weeks ago where I
Mhm.
played some memory videos, and I actually asked an Arabic friend of mine to check the translation
Mhm.
on 4 of them, and he said they were correct. So
yes,
doesn't mean you can generalize it to all of them, but
right,
yeah.
that is correct.
Yeah.
But the context in the memory video
Editing, I can't
is
see.
notorious.
Context.
Yes, is notorious, but I'm not going to quarrel about that because I couldn't see what was incorrect in what he said. My parents,
Well, let him answer.
no, just as a factual matter, my parents were in the Warsaw Ghetto. And guess what the Jewish Fighting Organization did? The Jewish Fighting Organization built tunnels in Gaza. Excuse me, tunnels in the Warsaw Ghetto. They were called the bunkers. Anybody who knows, I know it from my parents, but I also know it from having read all the books on the Warsaw Ghetto. So
Norman,
building
was
tunnels.
there like a international
the-
aid to the Warsaw Ghetto? Was
the-
they're
no,
given
I'm just saying-
I'm sorry,
so-
it's such a
so when
ridiculous
I-
analogy.
so when
It's
I-
Hold on. We
insulting
played the
to
video.
The memory of the Shoah.
We
It's
played the-
unbelievable
we-
that you would
Eli,
view this garbage. I'm
we
sorry.
we played the
So-
video, and he
Very
asked
good.
you.
Fair enough.
So what did the
Okay.
video prove? So go ahead, answer his question.
Well, I think what the video proves is that Hamas has quite a lot of resources to build
Mhm.
tunnels in which they can launch these abduction operations and kill various Israeli civilians. They have plenty of money to stockpile fuel. They have plenty of money to build their rockets and missiles. They have plenty of money to buy paragliders and so forth to pull off these military operations. But they apparently don't have enough money, and they don't even consider it their own responsibility to build bomb shelters for their own population when they start wars knowing that Israel is going to bomb. So this is why I really think that it's very important that we establish here that Hamas has all of Gaza captive. Now, you get no argument from me that innocent civilians are killed in these wars. That is true. But when you just completely rip the context away and not recognize that for Hamas, dead Palestinians are a war aim, and that right there is why I believe that you are not an ally of the Palestinians.
Oh, well, I was looking for a good place to pause. I think that's as good as any because this is something, I've been, I saw also Ben Shapiro similarly had an article called "Hamas Loves Dead Palestinian Civilians," and my thought when I read that is the same one I just had when I was listening to Eli Lake just now, which is, well, okay, let's assume that. So why do you want to give it to them? Like, like if this is like the dastardly plot of Hamas is to like make Israel look bad with this giant mountain of dead Palestinian children, then it's like there's a really easy way to deny it to them.
Also, another reason that we're constantly told Hamas likes dead Palestinians is because they do things that they know will cause Israel to bomb the shit out of Gaza. And I just think it's useful to like reverse that argument, right? I'm always being told that Hamas is responsible for Palestinian deaths caused by Israel because they should know what Israel will do in response to their actions.
Yeah, why doesn't that work the other way around?
Thing Eli Lake said earlier in this debate. But that's not true anywhere else in our culture, basically. And why isn't it the other way around?
Yeah, why don't you say if there's like a
when 10/7
Israel does something like Hamas responds by killing a bunch of Israeli civilians?
When 10/7 happens, according to their logic, we should be blaming the Israelis.
Yeah, for putting all those kibbutzim up as human shields. Exactly. I know.
And we should be blaming Israeli citizens for voting for that government.
Supporting that fascist regime.
Exactly.
Oh my God, I know.
Logic. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just pretty. Yeah, this whole like he's a false friend to Palestinians. Well, they need more real friends like you who are saying, yes, it's very tragic when they're killed, but it's war; they must die. And yet, the 1,000 dead is the 1/10 as many dead Israelis have you in a consumed with a revenge spree and drive you into a hissy fit. But with Palestine, with 10 times as many Arabs, people die in war. It's very sad. But our people's blood of our homeland has stained it, and we will get revenge. Many of you will die. It's an abstract and intellectual issue. It's very sad, of course.
Talk about Palestinian vigilantes going into Israel and committing these attacks. I mean, Ben brought up earlier that was already happening. Israeli settlers were already doing that before this conflict broke out, and so it's not even clear who started it because of that, in my opinion.
There's a pretty constant cycle here.
I
mean, like, I don't know. I guess my boiling hot take, this is right up there with, don't get COVID. Is
more edgy shit. Hold on, everybody.
Yeah.
Strap in. It's the Comedy Cellar. We have edgy bits.
Exactly. Is that when somebody dies, the person who's most responsible is the person who kills them?
Oh yeah.
You might think that. With you're philosophically illiterate, Ben, I bet. I mean, I've read your book. Well, I read part of them. I read enough. I love that at the very beginning. That was something I was annoyed by. I've had many students. I know the look of a kid who hasn't done the reading. I am looking at one right now. I read enough. Oh, you did you? Okay.
Yeah, the place, I think, by the way, where Norm nailed him in a very good sort of classic Norm fashion was trying to hand wave away with, well, they say this all the time. It's like, well, okay, so you should be able to give me some examples.
Yeah, also one example was not impressive.
But it's like, well, because it's like, well, I think this is what you're actually, he's like, oh, remember when they said this? And Norm is like, well, I think what you're talking about is this. He's like, no, I'm not talking about that. I'm saying, like, they say what I said they said all the time. It's like, okay, so for example,
and
it's a time and place where they did this. Like, if it's this is the kind of thing that, like, most people wouldn't do. I wouldn't do, right? That, like, but it's like something he is, like, particularly attuned to. This is just this sort of, like, he has this just very, like, I don't know. It's like sort of very dry and scholarly, but it's like really acidic in debates where it's like, it's like, no, come on. You're going to, don't just say shit. Like, give me, like, cite some sources, give me something I can check.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and again, like, going back to a couple points, I had something on that I forgot, but in response to what you were saying, but on a couple points that were brought up in the debate, like, so Eli Lake makes this distinction about how, we're not calling Palestinians or Gazans animals, we're calling Hamas animals.
Right.
And I just want to point out that, like, the three of us and probably a lot of people in the audience and in the chat are highly critical of Israel. And I don't think any of us have ever said anything like, soldiers of the IDF are human animals or less than animals.
Or, since Hamas has, both political and military wings, right? It's like everybody who's like, everybody who's like a member of the Likud party is like an animal or less than an animal, right? That would be the equivalent for somebody in the political wing of Hamas.
Right. And in the same way that, like, you and I might be considered like Democrats.
Yeah.
We voted for somebody.
Yeah.
But
should also say, right, that the somebody in the chat, I lost it. It went by a long time ago, but like somebody in the chat made this point, and I jogged my memory. This is absolutely right. That when he said that thing about the human animals, and by the way, I think Norm was distracted, or he surely would have pointed this out. He knows who Gideon Levy is. They were even in a debate together at the Oxford or Cambridge Union, whichever one that was. But Gideon Levy is a journalist who's actually very good. He's a good guy. Who they're thinking of is Yoav Gallant, the defense minister. Probably Gideon Levy wrote like an article about it. But But when Yoav Gallant said that about the human animals, he was saying that in the very same statement where he announced that they were cutting off explicitly, and like this isn't just even an implication of what he said. I mean, he drew out the implication. He was like, nothing. We're doing a total siege of Gaza. Nothing gets in. Not food, not water, not medicine. And it's like when you say that in the same breath as human animals, the claim that like human animals only refers to like Hamas fighters and not to the entire population you just cut off food and water and medicine for rings a little hollow.
Yeah, we're only going after the bad ones. 10,000 of you will die. Half of you are kids under 16, but only the bad ones are animals. I mean, we're killing all of you.
Yeah,
I mean, none of you.
We're going to bring up the bad ones being animals.
So everyone else is just dying for the animals, I guess. That's pretty rich. But to me, I mean, this gets back to something that Ben said earlier, too. Like, to me, when I have these conversations with people, like, I'm just force feeding every one of them their words on Ukraine for the last 2 years. Like, every fucking one of them. Everything Israel is doing, there's some smaller Russian analog in terms of how much munitions are shot, as we've established already tonight. But, when they were sieging Mariupol and they cut off food and water, everyone goes, war crime, war crime, war crime. Because it is. When anyone does it, Eli, when anyone does it. So I'm just feeding everyone their Ukraine words. Aggression, the supreme international crime. The crimes committed by Ukrainians are eventuated by your aggression. That's a really great point. Also about this, like nearly every bit. I mean, obviously, but so much of these big liberal stances. I'm just force feeding them back. I don't really have a big strategy other than that.
I got into this big argument with Eric Levitz on Twitter. People can check out about this point, but on the the point I was making in that case was that it's very confusing to me that I heard from all these people in like leftists or quasi leftists who supported the war in Ukraine a year and a half ago, that actually that's like the anti-imperialist thing to do. In fact, if you say you're against Russian imperialism, but you don't support, sending tens of billions of dollars of, of aid, of military aid, and directly into the coffers of Raytheon and Lockheed Martin, but indirectly to the Ukrainian military, then you're not really against Russian imperialism. And my question that started this argument was, well, hold on, if that's true, so the principle, if I'm understanding correctly, is you're only really against something if you want to send tens of billions of dollars of military aid to the victims. It's like, so how come exactly zero of the people who said this are advocating massive arms shipment to the Palestinians?
That's a great point. I mean, why is the administration dragging its feet on giving Palestine the F-16? I mean, are we serious about deterring aggression? Because this foot dragging, I mean, what about the Bradley fighting vehicle, Biden? What about the direct economic budget aid on top of the military gifts, of course? Like, these are all, I think Palestine could really use those intelligence assessments that.
It's almost like this was never a serious principle, that this was always just like a single-use rhetorical ploy.
Yeah, I don't want to underestimate Eli Lake, but it's just a feeling I'm starting to have that might be the case.
Yeah, it's also, if somebody wants to say, well, it's different because Hamas is really bad, so it's like one thing to fund the Ukrainian army, and by the way, it's not like those, it's not like all those weapons weren't also going to Azov. I mean, that's there's never been any doubt about that, right? In fact, Ilhan Omar was widely pilloried, for saying that she was concerned about how weapons ended up with Azov. But also, look, okay, fine. Why not go the Syria option? Say, we're not going to give it to Hamas, but we're taking applications from Palestinian moderate rebels.
If anyone wants to be a Juan Guaido of the Palestinians, we have the we're taking applications in the screening committee, but we'll make calls back. There'll be calls back.
Yeah. All right.
I just want to say that, like, I hardly believe in Russian imperialism. Just that phrase. I hardly believe that exists.
I believe it exists. I don't believe it's
Yeah.
I don't believe it's. I think
At
it's
least
like.
It's only on its periphery, though. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. Sure. That's true. I mean, look. I think that I think our standards have gone too high because, like most
So bad. Yeah.
most imperial powers are more on that level that they're just bullying or invading a few people who are right around them, right?
Yeah, like I have a local sphere of influence in the South China Sea. Like,
Actually, that's a really
like the
fair point.
bar has been raised so much because what the United States is,
yeah, Britain.
Like,
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, this is like these are like the sort of most extreme examples of imperial power like ever. Right? I mean, that like, yeah, I mean, like, yeah, the British Empire back when that the sun never set, or like the US right now, has a sphere of influence that apparently includes both, Israel and Ukraine and, God knows Latin America, Taiwan, it's,
I agree with that. That like in contemporary history, it is compared to the U.S. and therefore morphed.
Yeah, like nothing seems like a real empire compared to the U.S. I mean, it just
of course, or even compared to Britain for that matter in many ways.
Yeah. I mean, Britain now is like sort of become this, this sad little, but like, yeah, Britain back when.
Yeah.
I mean, the comparison I remember people always used to make with Bush and Blair was that, the UK was the lapdog to the United States, but I don't know. I like lapdogs, so that doesn't,
this is insulting to small breeds of dog. That's I didn't think about it that way.
Just real quickly, I meant to bring up. I forgot about this earlier with all the stuff about the Hamas indoctrination, which fair enough, right? True. You know who else indoctrinates kids?
Oh my. Unbelievable. Just to turn to this. Show that commercial. Show that show where they brainwash children. The territory on earth that brainwashes children. Brainwashing children. Where do people get the idea this is allowed?
Yeah,
plus
imagine a country that did
foreign languages.
Imagine a country that did nationalistic or religious or ideological brainwashing of children. There probably aren't a lot of those in the world. And I'd also point out there's this movie that I really recommend. Probably going to have the filmmakers on the show soon. Called Israelism. I wrote about it for Jacobin. I went to see a screening in LA back in the spring, which is all about people who basically grew up with various kinds of intense Zionist indoctrination, kind of coming to see as adults that they were lied to about important things and breaking away from it and joining groups like Jewish Voices for Peace and etc. So I have a sure, I'm sure the Hamas example is bad and ridiculous, but I think there's indoctrination enough to. I think there's indoctrination all around, right? There's there's plenty of there's no shortage of indoctrination all over the place. But yeah, Matthew,
or propaganda. I mean, just the fact that some of the sources I was citing early in the debate about the $100 to $3 million budget and the 40,000 fighters, compared to the NYPD, and that those reports on Hamas were alarmist. They were look how bad and scary this is, and it's nothing compared to one of our own police forces. I do just going back. Yeah, I do. I think we probably have some minor disagreements about Ukraine, but we can come. We'll get back into that another day. I just for time's sake, I wanted to make sure I point out that this thing about the tunnels. I just want to I mean.
Yeah, really, because the Jewish Fighting Organization of Warsaw, they didn't build bomb shelters, right? They have they didn't spend the resources they were spending on their bunkers on bomb shelters. So really, it's not even really the Luftwaffe's fault that all those people were killed in the bombing of the Warsaw Ghetto. I mean, that's a really great point. Eli Lake is somebody who strikes me as like thinking very carefully about everything before he says it.
Right. He also says people don't build tunnels. Oh, sorry, I wrote this down. He says that the reason Hamas built tunnels is because they, quote, have a lot of money.
Oh yeah, it's all these money and resources. Wow, all this money.
People don't build tunnels in like completely decimated war zones like this because they have lots of money.
Ugh.
And I should add, that's not why the Jews built tunnels in the Warsaw Ghetto. It wasn't because they had lots of money. And I think, we all accept that. Yeah.
Super rich people like the Viet Cong, people with lots of money. You're like, do I want a building above ground for walking? No. The stinking collapse-prone earth, I think, is better. Maybe it's because, Gaza, like Vietnam in the 70s, is subject to an unstopping wave of annihilation from some NATO-level military. Maybe that's
Viet Cong had to decide between digging some tunnels and like buying another aircraft carrier, and they're like,
Gaza Navy.
I guess we'll go with the tunnel, right?
I know, man. Like those Gazans, they just had to have that blue water navy. Like they couldn't settle for a Coast Guard, and there goes your above ground headquarters. Sorry, guys, it's
no, there were like all those Air Force bases they were going to build with all that money, ended up going to the tunnels instead.
Yeah,
amazing. All right, so it is 7:30 on Rob and I's coast, 10:30 on Matthew's. So we are going to go to the post game for patrons. Rob has been sick, so we're gonna say goodnight to him at this point. Thank you for lasting this long. But last thing before I go for tonight, for the main show, right before we go to the post game for patrons. If you are a patron, by the way, you should already have the link. If not, no time like the present, patreon.com/Ben Burgis. But I did just want to plug one of the Jacobin article. Unlike the other two I mentioned tonight, this one's not by me. This one is by somebody. No, but they have this one is by somebody named Chaim Katzman, who is no longer with us. He actually, he has PhD from the University of Washington, which people may know is where our friend Daniel Bessner teaches, and so. He's an Israeli. He died on 10/7, and Jacobin got permission from his family to reprint this paper that he wrote from Daniel Bessner for Daniel Bessner, the independent study he did with Daniel Bessner about why the case for a one-state solution, why he says Zionism is incompatible with liberal democratic principles. So do check that out. There's also a article I saw. I haven't read this one, but I saw it. The Nation was also published today by one of his siblings saying that my brother died on 10/7. I know he would be advocating a ceasefire now. So do check those out. It's going to be worth your time. So gonna go to the post game. I will I don't know. I'm gonna probably zip over to the bathroom first. Let's call it 5 minutes. So gonna go to the post game in like 5 minutes. I will see people then. I strongly suspect this is gonna have to be a two-parter of some kind, but we will see how much we get watched in the post game. Thank you so much, Rob. See you in a moment, Matt.
Good to see you, Rob.
Pleasure, guys.